Thank you so much, and thank you so much to Isokinetic for this opportunity. So we've had some phenomenal presentations over the course of this weekend, and my presentation, I think you're going to see a lot of echoes to Matt's as well. My goal today is actually to take a little step away from what are specific criteria for progression and get you to think maybe a little bit more creatively. How do we take our goals in rehab and put them on court? So how do we make rehab court time and court time rehab? So I do have to put up some considerations. So when I think of progression, some of my first thoughts, I've got to think about effusion, soreness, pain. Some of the indicators that are going to help me gauge how much we've done. Did we do too much? Did we do too little? Do we need to modify what we're doing now? Now, these might be indicators that are immediate. Pain might be an immediate indicator that we need to stop or modify, not necessarily always stop. And effusion and soreness might show up, 24, 48 hours later. So our monitoring of how we're doing and what we're doing. And we always have to start with the end in mind. So this is the START framework. And we often think about the START framework when we're putting together return to sport criteria. But I would say we also need to use this when we're looking at our criteria for progression as well. If we've got a 5'8" high school point guard, their progression through rehab, even if the injury is exactly the same, is going to be very different from a 7'3" NBA center. The requirements of the game, whether that's being able to bring the ball down the court versus set a screen, their demographics, their injury history, the demands of what they have to do in terms of their life outside sport, the timing in the season, the pressures, all of these things are going to be different, and they're all going to play into how we progress our athlete through their rehab. But we can start from the very, very early stages. And you might think, well, in basketball, because it's an upper extremity, we think of it sometimes as an upper extremity sport, that, if we have a lower extremity injury, we can start really early. Well, we can actually. Here's an example of shooting from sitting. I'd posit even if you're in football, or soccer, you can do this as well. Maybe it's volleying or passing or just getting touches with that uninvolved limb. Even when they're non-weight bearing, we can start this process. And this is really important because not only does it feed into the motivation of our athlete as they go through rehab, it helps make our rehab more sport specific. And our rehab is truly an opportunity. Now, we look at, oftentimes, our rehab as a chance to get our athlete better as an athlete, functionally, strength-wise, performance-wise. But we have to take a wider view. For a basketball player, a rehab can be a chance for them to become a better basketball player. Now, we can't do that alone. I've only worked in basketball for a year. I don't have the skill set to do that, but we can use this rehab time as an opportunity to develop this basketball player towards their goals as a basketball player as well. So early on, say we're starting, just working on weight bearing and squatting. Using things like dribbling and passing, I can get an athlete to start weight shifting, getting onto that, say, involved leg, or starting to step. So this movement's an unconscious movement as they're focused on the ball, but now I'm starting to get them moving and starting to get them, say, away from a pattern that I don't want. We can progress that into, say, a little bit higher level task. This is what we call form shooting. So the athlete's not jumping, but they do have to weight shift forward onto their toes. And we can actually kind of progress this for an NBA player. We can get them actually almost out to the three-point line. Again, I can play with this a little bit. Maybe I can put the athlete underneath the basket on a single leg. Now they can't use their vision to stabilize because they've got to look up. So it's a pretty challenging balance task. I can put one foot elevated, again, weight shifting them onto that involved leg. We can progress this into what we call spot shooting. So now we've got a little bit of a jump involved. This might be used to progress into like a return to running. This small hop, on two legs, we can progress to, say, hopping onto one leg, and then into return to run progression. We can add in footwork. Now this is footwork that they're actually going to use during a game, but we can start pretty slowly and then build with speed and intensity. And maybe this then moves into actually moving. Once our athlete's actually running and moving around the court, they can run to receive a ball. We can start to add in changes of direction, actually both with the footwork as well as now with the running, starting slow and then progressing. So this is really a basic framework. I haven't really told you guys anything totally novel. But from this basic framework, we can really start to address some of our rehab goals in the court environment. So if we take this back to kind of our basic principles of exercise prescription, thinking about specificity, overload, and progression, our goals in rehab are to put the athlete in the environment and expose them to the stressors of what they're going to face. So we've got lots of variables then that we can play with, and that we've got to actually kind of think about throwing at our athlete, whether that's speed and intensity, whether that's load. And you can look at load from an accelerometer point of view, from a jumping point of view, from a tibial or bone load point of view, to the complexity in terms of cognitive load, decision-making, surface, environment. There's a recent paper that came out actually just within the last month by Ali Gokeller and some of his colleagues, and it lays out some motor learning principles. Now they put it in the context of ACL rehab, but I would posit that it's actually applicable across rehab. So the principles that they lay out are external cueing, so giving cues outside the body, saying rather than I want you to fire your glutes, think about I want you to push the ground back behind you. Implicit learning. So rather than giving your athlete an explicit step-by-step direction, we're instead giving them an analogy, helping them develop a kind of an internal visual picture of what that movement looks like. So they can refer to it kind of almost unconsciously rather than thinking step-by-step. Differential learning is the idea of giving you an outcome, and there's many different ways to achieve that outcome. So maybe I'm going to tell my athlete, all right, your goal is to shoot this basket. I want you to come up with as many ways as you can come up with to do that. Maybe that's the three-point line, the free throw, a drive to the basket, a layup. I can do that with a rehab principle as well. Self-controlled learning, giving your athletes some control over this rehab process. That could be letting them pick the order of their exercises, or giving them a number of exercises and letting them pick which ones, or even letting them tell you when they want feedback. Maybe they do multiple trials and they get to say, I want feedback on this one. And then contextual interference, which we can kind of think about in terms of blocked versus random practice, with random practice being having more contextual interference. But maybe this is also changing environments or doing one task within the context of another. So we can take these and you can start to apply them throughout your rehab. So let's go back to single leg balance. This is one way if you really want to get your coworkers frustrated, is ask them to do this. So we can start with balance, and then we can add in two balls. So maybe in this case, we've got a basketball and a tennis ball. We start out saying, okay, well, you're going to bounce both balls back to me. And then you say, okay, you bounce the basketball, you've got to throw the tennis ball. And we can make this even more complex and add more cognitive load to it. So maybe now they've got to answer some questions. Maybe we've got letters on that tennis ball, and as they catch the tennis ball, they've got to read the letter. So now we've got a visual component to that piece as well. Sometimes I'll have athletes commentate a game. So now they've got to both watch the game, anticipate what's going to go on in that game, while also performing this motor task. Or maybe you're adding a counting task, and then the task, whatever they're doing, changes. These are really easy ways where we can start to take that basic motor pattern and challenge your athlete to continue to perform it well under more stress. Decision-making is also obviously really important. So this movement looks pretty similar to what I showed you at that very basic level. They're just moving to a spot to receive the ball. Now we're giving either a visual or a verbal cue as to whether or not the athlete takes the shot or drives to the basket. If you're an NBA player and you're taking a free throw, there is all sorts of visual and auditory distractions going on while you're playing and while you're taking that free throw. we can start to put some of those in our rehab, again, thinking about putting our athlete under some of the stressors that they're going to face when they return to play. Adding another player adds some of this reaction and anticipation to our rehab. So whether we're working on quick accelerations and decelerations, say closing out, or reacting while doing agility. You can see these are at a pretty slow pace, but we can easily increase the pace, increase the intensity, putting more stress on that athlete. This can also be, those were examples on defense, this can also be on offense. So now we can start to both react, but also then try and force your defender to do certain things or react to what they're going to do. And contact. I can take a simple kind of lateral stepping drill, maybe with a band, and add incredibly more variability to it just by taking that band out and my applying the pressure to that player's hip. Now that variability of where that pressure is coming from is changing, they've got to react to it, they've got to stabilize. And then we can take that one step further and have them start to generate force off of it. Maybe they're pushing off of me in order to drive to the basket. So really simple exercises can really easily be put in this court context and start to be put in a framework for what an athlete's really going to use when they return. Using another player is definitely going to help you. So 1v1, whether that's just in a specific situation like the videos I just showed you, or actually playing 1v1, is a great transition for building intensity, building contact, and safely kind of exposing that athlete. As we're trying to return our players, similar to in soccer where we can tailor a small-sided game to the demands of what we need that athlete to be exposed to, we can do that similarly in basketball. So if we're trying to get our athlete to get maybe higher loads, thinking about more full court 2v2 and 5v5 are going to help achieve that best. If we're looking for higher accelerations, then looking at half court 3v3 and 5v5 are going to be more ideal. The absolute key to all of this is that you're having fun. And there's actually some pretty solid rehab data out there that says if your athlete's having fun, you're going to have better functional outcomes. They're going to enjoy it a lot more. It's going to be more specific to them. And in all likelihood, you're going to have a lot more fun with it too. But I would say the other key to it is collaboration. Like I said, I've actually only been in basketball for a year. So coming in, I had no idea really what the difference between the demands on a point guard or a center were, what they needed to do. So collaborating with coaches both to understand the demands that your players are going to face, but also to help that player really truly achieve their basketball goals as well as their rehab goals. Obviously a collaboration with your performance team, but also with support staff. This is really a team effort around this player to get them back. Thank you very much.
Thank